The silence in the grand hall was suffocating. Every eye in the room fixed on the tall figure standing at attention near the palace entrance. His red uniform was immaculate. His black bearskin hat added inches to his already imposing height, but it was his face that held everyone's attention. Blank, unmoved. Stone, across from him, stood Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Webb of the United States Army. Webb's jaw was tight. His chest rose and fell with barely controlled anger. The two men had been locked in this standoff for almost 3 minutes. It felt like an hour. "I said move," Webb repeated, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "That is a direct order." The royal guard did not blink, did not shift, did not breathe differently. He stood like a statue carved from marble, his rifle held at a perfect angle against his shoulder. His eyes stared straight ahead, past Webb, past the crowd, past everything. Webb took a step closer. The heels of his polished boots clicked against the marble floor. The sound echoed. "Do you understand English, soldier?" Still nothing. A murmur rippled through the gathered crowd. Diplomats, military officials, members of the press. They had all come for the joint ceremony between the United States and the United Kingdom, a symbol of unity, of respect. But now tension filled the air like electricity before a storm. Before we go further into what happened next, make sure you're subscribed to this channel and hit that bell icon so you never miss stories like this one. Trust me, you won't want to miss how this ends. Webb's face was turning red. He was not used to being ignored. In his 23 years of service, orders were followed. Always, without question. He had commanded troops in 3 different countries. He had earned his rank through discipline and control. And now, this foreign soldier, this ceremonial guard, was making him look like a fool in front of everyone. "Last chance," Webb said, his voice lower now, more dangerous. "Step aside now." The guard's chest rose, fell, rose again. Steady as a heartbeat, but his feet did not move. Webb's hand twitched toward his side. For a moment, it seemed like he might do something rash. The entire room held its breath. Security personnel near the walls shifted their weight, uncertain. Should they intervene? Could they? Then the guard spoke. His voice was calm, deep. British accent sharp and clear. Each word measured like a judge delivering a verdict. "It's her," he said, eyes still locked forward. "I do not take orders from you." The room erupted. Gasps, whispers, a few nervous laughs. Webb's face went from red to purple. His fists clenched at his sides. "Excuse me?" Webb's voice was a growl now. The guard's eyes finally moved. Slowly, deliberately, they shifted and locked onto Webb's. And in that gaze was something unshakable. Not defiance. Not disrespect. Something else entirely. "I take orders from Her Majesty the Queen," the guard said, his voice steady as iron. "My post is here. You may outrank many men, Colonel, but you do not outrank my duty." The silence that followed was deafening. Webb stood frozen. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. No words came out. And then from the back of the room, slow and deliberate, came the sound of footsteps. Everyone turned. The footsteps were measured, confident. They came from the far side of the hall, beyond the row of marble columns. A figure emerged from the shadows. Gray hair, dress uniform, covered in medals. A British general. 3 stars gleamed on his shoulders. General Sir Anthony Harrington. He moved through the crowd like a ship cutting through water. People stepped aside without thinking. His eyes were fixed on the scene ahead. On Webb. On the guard. On the standoff that had brought an international ceremony to a grinding halt. Webb straightened immediately. Protocol demanded it. A 3-star general outranked him by 2 full grades. But his face still burned with humiliation. He had been challenged, refused, embarrassed in front of dozens of witnesses. And now, a British general was walking straight toward him. Harrington stopped 3 feet away. He looked at Webb, then at the guard, then back at Webb. His expression was unreadable. "Colonel Webb," Harrington said, his voice calm but carrying weight. "Is there a problem?" Webb's jaw worked. He chose his words carefully. "General, I gave this soldier an order to move aside." He refused. "That is insubordination, sir." "Regardless of what flag he serves under?" Harrington tilted his head slightly. "An order? To do what exactly?" "To step aside from his post," Webb said, gesturing toward the doorway the guard was protecting. "I need access to that corridor. I was told it was open for us personnel during the ceremony." Harrington's eyes flicked to the guard. The young man remained at attention, but something in his posture had shifted. Not relaxed, but vindicated. "Guardsman Holloway," Harrington said, addressing the soldier directly. "What were your orders?" "Sir," Holloway replied, voice clear and sharp, "I was ordered to guard this entrance and allow no one through without proper clearance signed by the palace security chief. No exceptions. Those orders came directly from Captain Winters this morning, sir." He turned back to Webb. "Colonel, did you have clearance from palace security?" Webb hesitated. "Just for a second, but it was enough. I was told by my liaison officer that all corridors would be accessible. That is not what I asked." The words landed like a hammer. Webb's face went tight. "No, General. I do not have written clearance." Harrington let the silence stretch. The crowd watched, barely breathing. This was no longer just a standoff between a guard and an officer. This was something bigger. A question of authority, of respect, of protocol. "Then Guardsman Holloway," Harrington said, turning slightly toward the young soldier, "was doing exactly what he was trained to do." Webb opened his mouth to protest, but Harrington raised a hand. Not aggressive, just firm. "Colonel, I understand your frustration, but this young man is a member of the King's Guard. His duty is not to convenience. It is not to preference. It is to his post and his orders. He does not move because someone asks. He does not yield because someone demands. He holds his ground because that is what he was sworn to do." Harrington took a step closer to Webb. His voice dropped, but everyone could still hear. "You are a decorated officer, Colonel. You have served your country with honor. I have read your file. But today, you made a mistake. You assumed authority you did not have, and when challenged, you escalated." Webb's face was stone now. He said nothing. Harrington continued. "This young man could have wavered. He could have been intimidated. He could have broken protocol to avoid confrontation, but he did not. He stood his ground, and that, Colonel, is something every soldier should be trained to do. To follow orders, to trust their command, even when it is difficult, even when it is uncomfortable." The general turned to Guardsman Holloway. "Well done, Guardsman. You are dismissed from this post. Report to Captain Winters." Holloway saluted sharply. "Sir?" He turned, movements crisp and precise, and marched toward the side corridor. The crowd parted. He disappeared through a doorway. Harrington looked back at Webb. "I believe we have a ceremony to continue, Colonel." Webb's throat worked. He gave a stiff nod. "Yes, sir." But as the crowd began to disperse, whispers spreading like wildfire, one question hung in the air. What would happen next? 2 hours later, the ceremony was over. Speeches had been made. Hands had been shaken. Cameras had flashed. But the tension lingered like smoke after a fire. No one could stop talking about what had happened. About the guard who refused to move. About the American officer who had been put in his place, in a small office deep inside the palace. Guardsman Thomas Holloway sat across from Captain Winters. The captain was younger than most people expected. 38, sharp eyes, a scar along his jawline from a deployment in Afghanistan years ago. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, studying Holloway. "Do you know what you just did?" Winters asked. Holloway kept his posture straight. "I followed orders, sir." "You embarrassed a high-ranking American officer in front of half the military elite of 2 nations?" "I followed orders?" Sir Holloway repeated, his voice firm. Winters stared at him for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. "You did, and you did it perfectly." Holloway blinked. He had expected a reprimand, maybe even disciplinary action, not approval. Winters leaned forward, elbows on his desk. Holloway, how long have you been with the guard? 2 years, sir. And in those 2 years, have you ever broken protocol? Ever failed an inspection? Ever been late to a post? No, sir. Winters nodded. That is why I knew I could trust you with that assignment today. That corridor leads to a secure area where sensitive documents were being stored during the ceremony. No one, and I mean no one, was supposed to enter without clearance. Not American. Not British. Not anyone. Holloway's expression did not change, but something shifted in his eyes. Understanding. Colonel Webb did not know that. Winters continued. He thought it was just a shortcut. His liaison officer made a mistake. Told him the wrong information, but you did not know any of that. You just knew your orders. And you held. Winters stood and walked to the window. Outside, the palace grounds stretched out in perfect symmetry. Tourists moved along the distant gates. Life went on, as it always did. There will be fallout from this, Winters said quietly. Webb is not a bad man. He is proud, disciplined. But today, his pride got the better of him. He could have asked for clarification. He could have waited for confirmation. Instead, he tried to use his rank to force his way through. He turned back to Holloway. But you reminded him of something important. Rank does not mean blind obedience. It means earned respect. And respect is not given because someone demands it. It is given because someone deserves it. Holloway nodded slowly. What happens now, sir? Winters returned to his desk. Now, you go back to your duties. This incident will be reviewed, but you will not be reprimanded. In fact, General Harrington is asked to speak with you. Holloway's eyes widened slightly, sir. Tomorrow morning, 0100. He wants to meet the man who stood his ground. Winters smiled again. You made an impression, Holloway. A good one. Holloway stood and saluted. Thank you, sir. As he left the office, his mind was spinning. He had done what he thought was right, what he was trained to do, but he had not expected this. Recognition, approval, a meeting with a 3-star. General. He walked through the quiet corridors of the palace, his footsteps echoing. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the stone walls. He thought about Webb, about the anger in his eyes. The humiliation. Holloway did not take pleasure in it. He understood what it was like to be challenged, to feel disrespected. But he also understood something else, something his father had told him years ago when he first enlisted. Your duty is not to make people happy. Your duty is to do what is right, even when it is hard. And today, it had been hard. But as Holloway stepped out into the courtyard, he felt something he had not expected. Pride, not arrogance, not triumph. Just quiet, steady pride. He had done his job. And in doing so, he had reminded everyone watching what it truly meant to serve. Asterisk, the next morning arrived cold and gray. Fog clung to the palace grounds like a blanket. Holloway stood outside General Harrington's office at exactly 0-7-50-5. 5 minutes early. Never late. That was the rule at 0100. The door opened. A young aide gestured him inside. The general will see you now. Holloway entered. The office was smaller than he expected. No grand desk. No walls covered in medals and photographs. Just a simple workspace. A few books. A single painting of the British countryside. And behind the desk, General Harrington, reading a file, he looked up. Guardsman Holloway. Sit. Holloway sat back straight, hands on his knees. Harrington closed the file and folded his hands. For a moment, he just looked at Holloway, studying him, not with judgment, with curiosity. Tell me something, Harrington said. When Colonel Webb gave you that order, what went through your mind? Holloway considered the question. Sir, I thought about my orders, about my duty. I thought about what would happen if I failed. And what would happen? Someone unauthorized could have accessed a restricted area. That could have compromised security. It could have endangered people. Harrington nodded. And what about your career? Did you think about that? Holloway hesitated. For a moment, sir? Yes. And I decided it did not matter. If I broke my orders to protect my career, then I did not deserve the uniform. Harrington leaned back in his chair. A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. You know, I have been in the military for 34 years. I have commanded hundreds of men. I have seen soldiers make decisions under fire. I have seen courage in places most people cannot imagine. But yesterday, you showed something just as important as battlefield courage. You showed moral courage. He stood and walked to the window. The fog was beginning to lift. Pale sunlight broke through in thin streams. Moral courage, Harrington continued, is the hardest kind. It is easy to be brave when your life is on the line. It is easy to act when survival demands it. But to stand firm when your reputation is at stake, when your career could be ruined, when a superior is shouting at you in front of a crowd. He turned back to Holloway. That is rare. Holloway said nothing. He did not know what to say. Harrington returned to his desk. Colonel Webb spoke to me last night. Holloway's stomach tightened. He was angry, Harrington said. At first, embarrassed. But after we talked, he understood. He made a mistake. He admitted it. That takes courage, too. He picked up a paper from his desk. Webb has requested to meet with you. To apologize. Holloway blinked. Sir, he is a good officer, Holloway. Pride got the better of him yesterday. But he knows it. And he wants to make it right. Harrington set the paper down. I told him I would ask you first. You are under no obligation to accept. But I think it would be good. For both of you. Holloway thought about it. He pictured Webb's face. The anger. The humiliation. But he also thought about what Harrington said. About admitting mistakes. About making things right. I will meet with him, sir. Harrington smiled. Good. I will arrange it. He stood, and Holloway stood with him. But before Holloway could salute and leave, Harrington spoke again. One more thing. The king has been informed about yesterday. He wanted me to pass along a message. Holloway's heart skipped. The king, he had been told, said. Harrington continued that the guard exists not just to protect buildings or people. It exists to protect a principle. The principle that duty comes before comfort. That honor comes before convenience. And yesterday, you embodied that principle. Harrington extended his hand. Holloway shook it, feeling the weight of the moment. Well done, guardsman. Dismissed. Holloway saluted and turned to leave. But as he reached the door, Harrington called out, Holloway, turn back. Do not let this change you. Stay humble. Stay focused. But remember this day. Because moments like this define who you are. Holloway nodded. I will, sir. And as he walked out into the cold morning air, he felt something powerful. Not pride. Not relief. Something deeper. Purpose. The meeting was set for 1400 hours. 2 o'clock. In a neutral space, a small conference room used for diplomatic meetings. No cameras. Just 2 soldiers and a conversation that needed to happen. Holloway arrived 10 minutes early. He wore his dress uniform perfectly pressed. His shoes gleamed. He sat in one of the chairs and waited, hands folded on the table. At exactly 1400, the door opened. Colonel Webb stepped inside. He wore his dress uniform as well. No medals today. Just the clean lines of his rank and service. His face was calm, but there was something in his eyes. Something heavy. He closed the door behind him and stood there for a moment. Then he walked to the table and sat across from Holloway. Silence filled the room. Webb cleared his throat. Guardsman Holloway. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me, Sir Holloway replied with a nod. Webb looked down at his hands. He seemed to be searching for words. Finally, he spoke. I owe you an apology. Holloway did not move. What I did yesterday, Webb continued, was wrong. I was frustrated. I was given incorrect information by my liaison, and I took that frustration out on you. I used my rank as a weapon. And that is not what leadership is. He looked up, meeting Holloway's eyes. You were doing your job. You were following your orders. And I tried to intimidate you into breaking them. That was dishonorable. Holloway felt a knot loosen in his chest. He had expected defensiveness, excuses, not this, not raw honesty. "Sir," Holloway said carefully, "I understand. Mistakes happen. You were under pressure." Webb shook his head. "That is no excuse. I have been in the military long enough to know better. Pressure is part of the job. But how we handle it defines us." He paused. "You handled it with integrity. I did not." He leaned forward slightly. "I have been thinking about what happened, about why it bothered me so much. And I realized something. It was not about the corridor. It was not even about the ceremony. It was about control." Webb's voice grew quieter. "I have spent my entire career giving orders, being obeyed, commanding respect. And when you refused me, it felt like everything I had built was being challenged. But you were not challenging me, Holloway. You were doing exactly what I have always taught my own soldiers to do. Follow your orders. Trust your chain of command. Do not waver." He straightened. "You reminded me of what I used to be. Before the ranks, before the titles. When I was just a soldier, trying to do the right thing." Holloway felt a lump in his throat. He had not expected this level of vulnerability from a man like Webb. It was disarming. "Real, sir," Holloway said. "I respect what you are saying, and I accept your apology. But I also want you to know something. I did not enjoy what happened. I did not want to embarrass you. I just wanted to do my duty." Webb nodded. "I know. And that is what makes you a good soldier." He stood and Holloway stood with him. Webb extended his hand. "I hope we can move past this. Not as superior and subordinate, but as professionals who respect each other." Holloway shook his hand firmly. "We can, sir." Webb held the handshake for a moment longer than necessary. Then he released it and turned toward the door. But before he left, he stopped and looked back. "One more thing, Holloway. The story of what happened yesterday is spreading. People are talking about it. Some are saying you disrespected me. Others are saying you stood up for what was right. You need to be prepared for both." Holloway nodded. "I will be, sir." Webb gave a small smile. "I think you will be just fine." And then he was gone. Holloway stood alone in the quiet room. The weight of the past 2 days pressed on him, but it was a different kind of weight now. Not burden, responsibility. He had been tested. He had held firm. And now he had seen something powerful. A man with the courage to admit he was wrong, that Holloway realized, was just as important as standing his ground, maybe more. Asterisk 3 weeks later, the story had faded from the headlines. The news cycle moved on. New scandals. New crises. But within military circles, the name Thomas Holloway was remembered. He returned to his regular duties. Standing post. Performing ceremonies. Training younger guardsmen. But something had changed. Not in how he did his job, but in how people saw him. Officers nodded at him in hallways. Fellow soldiers asked him questions about protocol. Even civilians who visited the palace would sometimes recognize him from the photos that had circulated online. "Are you the guard who stood up to the American officer?" They would ask. Holloway never answered. He just smiled politely and returned to his post. One afternoon, as he stood guard at the main entrance, a group of school children passed by on a tour. One boy, no more than 10 years old, stopped and stared up at Holloway. His eyes were wide with wonder. "Ma'am," the boy whispered, tugging on his mother's sleeve. "Is he real?" The mother smiled. "Yes, love. He is very real." The boy continued to stare. "Does he ever move?" "Only when he needs to," the mother said. "He is doing his job. Protecting this place. Protecting us." The boy's face lit up with admiration. And in that moment, Holloway understood something profound. His job was not just about following orders. It was about being a symbol, a reminder that duty still mattered, that principles still existed, that some things were worth standing for no matter the cost. Later that week, Holloway received an unexpected letter. It was delivered to his barracks by a palace courier. The envelope was simple, no markings. Just his name. Inside was a handwritten note. "Guardsman Holloway, I wanted to thank you for the example you set. Leadership is not always about making the loudest statement. Sometimes it is about standing quietly in the face of pressure. You did that. And in doing so, you reminded all of us what true service looks like. I am proud to serve alongside men like you. Colonel Marcus Webb, United States Army. Holloway read the note 3 times. Then he folded it carefully and placed it in his footlocker. He would keep it, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that even in conflict, there could be respect. Even in mistakes, there could be growth. Months passed. Seasons changed. Holloway continued his service. But the lesson of that day stayed with him. It shaped how he trained, how he led, how he treated others. Years later, when he was promoted to sergeant, he would tell the story to young recruits. Not to boast, but to teach. Your duty, he would say, is not always convenient. It is not always popular, but it is always yours. And when you stand for it, you stand for something bigger than yourself. And they would listen, because they knew the story was true. They knew it had been tested, and they knew that the man telling it had lived it. The day of the standoff became legend. Some remembered it as the day a guard defied an American officer. Others remembered it as the day 2 soldiers found mutual respect. But those who understood it best remembered it as something simpler, a reminder that courage is not always loud. Sometimes it is standing still when the world tells you to move. Sometimes it is saying no when everyone expects you to say yes. And sometimes it is simply doing your duty even when it costs you everything. Guardsman Thomas Holloway had done that. And in doing so, he had shown the world what it truly meant to serve, not with arrogance, not with pride, but with quiet, unshakable integrity. And that, more than any medal or rank, was the highest honor a soldier could earn. The story ends there, but its lesson echoes. In every barracks, every training ground, every post where a soldier stands and wonders if duty is worth the sacrifice, the answer, as Holloway proved, is always yes. Because duty is not just about following orders. It is about standing for something greater than yourself. It is about knowing that when the moment comes, you will not waver. You will not break. You will hold the line no matter what.